I would like to open by stating that Andrew's claim that my 12-second violation of the time limit is grounds for penalty is illegitimate due to the fact that when taking into account setup times and pauses for thinking, I was under the 5-minute limit. Not only this, but if Andrew so chooses, he could go 12 seconds over the limit in his closing just to be sure everything is fair. Now, I would like to address the calls for relevance that Andrew had in his rebuttal by explaining why I brought up the cases of migrant labor and Native American exploitation as well as the case of the Irish slaves. This is my fault for not being explicit. These are in fact critiques of his moral reasoning by showing that the institutional barriers and history of unjust profiteering via exploitation is not unique to African Americans, and therefore leaves Andrew's moral case for reparations too universal. According to his logic, the U.S. would be morally required to pay reparations to countless groups of people, such as Chinese Americans, Irish Americans, Mexican Americans, and Native Americans, and this would leave the government with little money for anything other than reparations payments. This renders his moral reasoning insufficient due to a universality problem. Now, he never in fact addressed the financial harms of his plan, and in fact expanded upon them by co-opting my counterplan during his permutation. Shifting the revenue generation from taxes and spending cuts to international loans would directly increase the government national debt, and this would still cause the economy to come crashing down. A $10 trillion increase on our national debt is a 64% increase over the current $18 trillion mark, and this would not only send our debt through the legally imposed limit, but also have a number of other repercussions. The largest debt limit increase in U.S. history is $1.9 trillion, and current negotiations look to increase it by $2.4 trillion, and these debates can be described as contentious at best in the House of Representatives. Now, this record limit being debated right now is barely more than 1/5 the size of the debt Andrew's plan would accrue immediately by taking on foreign loans. Such a debt increase would force the U.S. to default on its loans and destroy U.S. credit for generations, leaving even if by some miracle the debt limit could be raised, the Federal Reserve would be forced to increase interest rates on Treasury bonds in order to help pay this down. Now, these interest rates on Treasury bonds are the marker for cross-industry interest rates and will lead to an increase on everything from credit card interest rates to mortgage loans to student loans. This would significantly impede economic growth by raising cost of living expenses. His plan would also impede wage growth by forcing the government to spend more on debt and less on economic stimulus, leaving the financial burden of operation more to large and small businesses alike. Also, Andrew has ignored the significant increase in inflation that would come from directly infusing $10 trillion into the economy. A supply-demand curve for currency would shift in such a way that the value of the dollar would go to basically zero. This is, There is currently $1.2 trillion in circulation in the United States. Adding $10 trillion to the currency market would have disastrous effects on the value of the dollar by shifting supply curves to such an extent that there's too much in circulation, there's no value to it. This would render the monetary reparations Andrew proposes completely ineffective. Since Andrew's monetary reparations would inherently crash the economy due to a lack of legitimate and logical funding streams, his permutation plan is not feasible either, due to its even greater costs. Rather, my plan of solely housing vouchers for low-income black families and tax credits for affluent black families who are traditionally more open to investment and consumption on a scale that spurs economic growth is more effective. This would solve for the harms that legacies of slavery and de jure segregation have had on poor black Americans, while simultaneously addressing the problems of the black population facing the black population on the whole by offering a symbolic and legitimate tax credit reparation to those already living in socioeconomically affluent areas. In conclusion, the judge should vote for the opposition because Andrew's moral reasoning suffers from a universality problem which would force the government to pay reparations to too many groups. His original plan and permutated plan would both harm the economy to such an extent that the reparations would not help black Americans and make every person living in the U.S. far worse off. And because my counterplan is inherently more qualified to help repay black Americans for slavery and de jure segregation both practically and symbolically. Thank you, opponent and judge.